So, I want to describe a meeting I've been in. Not one specific meeting necessarily, a meeting that happens in every single design-led business I've worked in, and that I keep hearing about from founders that I talk to. The product is good, the margins are healthy, the brand does something most competitors would kill for. People who actively want to buy deeper into it. Not just willing to pay the price, but actually looking for ways to go further in. The kind of customers who choose the highest specification, not because they need it, but because they want more of the brand. Who'd commission a completely bespoke version if you offered one. They aren't really buying a product so much as buying a piece of something they want to belong to. And then someone opens a spreadsheet. They point at a line item, a material cost at 3 times the price of the alternative, a retail space that doesn't optimize for football, packaging that costs more than some competitors' products, the part of your creative team that doesn't produce anything for sale, the experimental work, the pieces that exist to push the thinking forward rather than generate revenue. And they ask, can we justify this? And look, it's a reasonable question. It sounds responsible, even helpful. It's the kind of question that gets asked in every well-run business. And the person asking is usually doing their job properly. But here's the problem. The question has a blind spot built into it. So let me explain what I mean by that. I spent a decade shaping Range Rover and Jaguar, working at that intersection of brand strategy and product. And what I kept seeing from inside was how often the most commercially powerful decisions in the business were exactly the ones being challenged hardest by the finance teams and the engineering-minded people around them. Not because those people were incompetent, because they genuinely believed cheaper alternatives would be fine. They couldn't see what the expensive choice was actually bringing or doing. And because they couldn't see it, they assumed it wasn't doing anything. My job, or the part of my job I cared most about, was identifying which of those fights was worth picking, which decisions were load-bearing, because not every expensive choice is essential, but some of them are holding the whole architecture up, and people pushing to cut them had no way of knowing which was which. And I think most founder-led businesses who put design at the forefront know this intuitively. They can feel it. They've watched it happen, but when they're sat across from someone asking, can we justify this? Feeling isn't enough. You need a way to explain why the question is incomplete without making the person asking it feel stupid. And that's the bit no one teaches you. So let me give you some examples, because I think they can articulate the point better than I can in the abstract. Moncler has a boutique, or two boutiques in Courchevel, one in the village and one on the ski slopes. The one on the ski slopes is the one to focus on, because you arrive in boots with probably some snow on your jacket, and as a piece of retail strategy, it's almost comically inefficient. Limited footfall, very seasonal, inaccessible to anyone who isn't actively skiing. A spreadsheet would start to flag this immediately. Revenue per square meter, terrible. Cost of operation relative to the high street location, indefensible. But here's the thing, right? Moncler was founded in a mountain village near Grenoble in 1952. They made their first down jackets for factory workers at altitude. So that store isn't a marketing stunt. It's the brand in its original context. You don't go to Moncler in Courchevel. You encounter it while doing the thing their products were made for. And the trust that creates, that feeling that this brand belongs here, isn't something you can capture in a spreadsheet cell. But it's definitely the reason someone buys a Moncler jacket instead of choosing any number of technically equivalent alternatives. The spreadsheet sees the cost of the store. It can't see what the store is doing to the way people feel about Moncler everywhere else. And then there's Jonathan Anderson, who admitted something recently when he became the creative director of Dior. He said he used to think couture was irrelevant. Too expensive, too niche, too disconnected from the commercial reality. But then he spent time in the atelier, and his mind was changed. He started describing couture as a lab, a space where that freedom from commercial pressure produces the vision and direction for everything the house makes. Now, on a spreadsheet, Dior's couture operation looks like pure cost with no return. It will never turn a profit. The collection is shown in person to, a few hundred people, and most of the pieces will never be worn outside of a runway. On paper, it's a ridiculous thing to fund. But here's what I find really fascinating. While Anderson is pushing couture further into experimental territory at the top, Dior is simultaneously expanding its entry-level offer, meaning more accessories under €1,000, more bags under 4,000, a 27% increase in accessible pieces over the past 3 years. And most boards would look at those two moves and see a contradiction. Spending more on something that will never sell with couture, while also reaching down market. That looks like strategic confusion, but I actually see it as one coherent move. The mythology Anderson creates at the top is what makes a pair of earrings, 3 levels down, feel like they belong to something. Without that, the accessible offer is just a product at a price point. With it, it's an entry into a world. The lab funds the ladder funds the lab. And a spreadsheet can model the cost of couture. It can model the revenue from accessories. What it can't model is the relationship between them. And that relationship is the entire strategy. So what's actually going on here? The issue isn't that finance people are wrong. Their tools aren't wrong. A spreadsheet is extraordinarily good instrument for measuring what it was designed to measure. Direct costs, direct revenues, direct returns. The problem is that in a design-led business, most of the value creation is indirect. And indirect doesn't mean invisible. It just means you have to follow the chain. So take a material choice. Say you're using a leather that costs 3 times more than the alternative your commercial team keeps suggesting. On a spreadsheet, that's a cost problem. 3 times the input, same retail price, margin shrinks. But that leather sits on a part of the product that your customer touches every single time they use it. And it's the first physical contact they have with the brand, over and over, day after day. And it feels different from the cheaper version. Not in a way most people could articulate, but in a way they register. It feels like someone thought about them. Like the person who chose this material understood what it would be like to live with this product, not just buy it. And that feeling builds trust. Trust that the brand cares about the details they can't see as much as the ones they can. Trust that compounds into loyalty, into repeat purchases, into the kind of relationship where the customer doesn't need convincing next time. They already know. And then they tell someone else. Now look at what the spreadsheet saw. A material costs 3 times higher than the alternative. That's it. That's all it could show. The entire chain from that leather to a customer who comes back 3 years later and brings a friend, all of that happened in the space the spreadsheet can't see. Each link in that chain is real. Each one can be observed, but the spreadsheet only picks up the first link and the last. The cost coming out and the revenue going in. Everything in between, the part where the value is actually created, falls into a gap the tool was never built to measure. It's not that the spreadsheet is wrong, it's the spreadsheet is a map without contour lines. It shows you the distance and direction perfectly well. What it can't show you is elevation. And if you're navigating terrain with hills and valleys and cliffs, a map without contour lines will tell you the route is clear, right up until the point you walk off the edge. So here's where this gets personal for founders. If you run a design-led business, you've probably been in that meeting. Someone has pointed at your most important creative decision and asked you to justify it. And you felt something tighten in your chest. Because you know it matters. You know it's right. But you can't explain why in a way that survives the conversation. So you say something like, it's what makes us us, or it's the soul of the brand, or you may even get defensive and say, you don't understand what we do. And none of those work. The first sounds vague, the second sounds precious, and the third sounds like you're hiding. The reason they don't work isn't because you're wrong about the decision, it's because you're answering the wrong question. When someone asks, can we justify this cost? The answer isn't to defend the cost. It's to reframe what they're looking at. That material, the one that costs 3 times more, start there. Start with what it is, where it sits, what it does to the experience of using the product every day. Walk them through the chain. The feel, the trust, the loyalty, the repeat purchase, the referral, and then show them the margin at the end and ask, where do you think that came from? Because if you remove the material, you don't save money, you lose the reason, someone pays what they pay. If you close the expensive retail space, you don't reduce overhead. You remove the context that makes every other touch point feel worth it. If you were to cut the experimental creative work, you don't eliminate waste, you hollow out the thing that separates you from being just another product at a price point. Not trust me, it matters, but instead, here's the commercial architecture you're not seeing. And here's what happens when you remove a load-bearing wall. Now, the typical response to this tension, the one I hear from consultants and board advisors, is that creative founders need to learn business, get better at spreadsheets, speak the CFO's language, become more commercially literate. And I'd really push back on that. Not because commercial literacy doesn't matter. It does, but because the advice assumes the spreadsheet is complete and the founder is the one missing something. What if it's the other way around? What if the founder's instinct is actually the more complete picture and the spreadsheet is the one with the gap? Not because the numbers don't matter, but because the numbers being registered aren't the right ones for this type of business. The tools we use to evaluate investment were largely built for a time when businesses could treat the product and the brand as separate concerns. When you could optimize production without touching perception, when cost reduction was always margin improvement. But in a design-led business, that separation doesn't exist. It never has. The material, the process, the environment, the experience, these aren't concerns that sit underneath the brand. They are the brand. You can't strip one back without diminishing the other. And the spreadsheet, built for a world where these could be separated, simply can't see that connection. And that's not an argument against measurement. It's an argument for better measurement, for finding ways to capture the indirect value that creative decisions create, rather than pretending they don't exist, because the current tools can't see them. The analogy that helps stick in my head the most is a designer being handed a tool that can't measure curves and being asked to evaluate a product full of them. They wouldn't conclude the curves were wrong. They'd conclude the tool was incomplete. And that's where we are with how most businesses evaluate creative investment. The tool is incomplete. And instead of upgrading the tool, we're asking founders to straighten the curves. Brands that resist that pressure, the ones that keep the expensive material, protect the creative lab, maintain the inaccessible retail space, they're not being indulgent, they're being precise about their value and where it actually comes from. And the brands that give in, the ones that let someone value engineer the soul out of the product to improve a quarterly number, they usually discover, probably about 18 months later, that the margin they were trying to protect has disappeared. Because it was never coming from efficiency, it was coming from the choice they cut. So if any of this sounds familiar, I'd start with one question. What's the most expensive creative decision in your business that someone keeps trying to kill? The one that comes up in every budget review, the one that gets circled in red and questioned every quarter. Now ask yourself, what would actually happen if you removed it? Not to this quarter's numbers, but to the brand next year, to the reason someone chooses you over the alternative, to the story your product tells before anyone opens their mouth. If removing it would save money but cost you the reason people pay what they pay, you don't have a cost problem. You have a measurement problem, and that is really worth fixing.